AMD's and Nvidia's refreshers RTX 50 Super and the RDNA 4 refresh, will they actually come to market or are they entirely cancelled? And what about the next generation of parts, for example RTX 60? When will that actually be released, given what's going on at the moment with the RAM apocalypse? Well, the latest rumours indicate that not only are AMD's GPUs going to become more expensive, as you can see right here in the headline, but also there's a possibility that AMD themselves won't be releasing a new product, at least for customers, throughout 2026. There's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about here, including some of the things that I'm hearing from my own sources, so let's just get right into it after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. This video is sponsored by UGreen and their DH2300, an absolutely amazing NAS for both home and small office use. Now, when UGreen sent me this thing a couple of weeks ago, I hadn't actually used a NAS before. Back in the day, I'd had my own home server, but more recently I've just been transferring files backwards and forwards. But now that I've been using this for the last couple of weeks, honestly, I would just never go back, and it's becoming a mainstay of my workflow. Being a YouTuber, I'm very used to dealing with very large video files, but the DH2300 has made life so much easier. Video captures, for example, for benchmarks can balloon to absolutely massive sizes, and that's to say nothing of video files, audio, images, and so on and so on. All of which previously I was sending from one PC to the other PC, but it's just not as easy, and that's to say nothing of issues I had with my iPhone. Windows doesn't natively support the iPhone 15 Pro when you're dealing with large video files. It's just sometimes not detecting the files correctly, so that means I had to upload them to drop. It became so much more of a pain in the butt. With this thing, life is so much easier, especially because you can manage everything using a web interface and also applications for the phone. Alongside the DH2300, I was given two 4TB drives, although the NAS does support larger drives, up to 30TB in capacity. The DH2300 is small, very larger than the two hard drives it fits. More importantly, it's totally silent in operation apart from the odd beep or two to tell you it's working, for example when you first switch it on. Everything was extremely simple to set up and manage. Plug in the NAS and after a few moments it will guide you through the setup process, allowing you to name the device, create a RAID, I opted for RAID 0, storage pools and of course users. After several minutes, the device will be accessible on your home network and each user can have their own folders and files. You can have those folders from a user be accessible by anyone but not writable. This is great, for example, for business reasons, or you can have entirely private folders. This is great as well for business, or if you have, say, kids, they can not access folders which would have like private information like bills or other such data. But also you can have profiles for your children, which of course you can view, you can modify, and they can modify as well. All of this can easily be managed via a web interface or an app you can install on your cell phone. But let's say you're traveling. What happens if you need an important document? Absolutely no problem. It's easy to set up the device to be accessible on the web. And again, you could have only one user who can access this if you would like. And of course, and what I personally do most of the time is just disable this functionality so it's only accessible via your home devices, because right now I'm not traveling, so I don't really need those folders available. The DH2300 offers a single USB-C port and two USB-A ports with 5 GBS transfer rates, and of course you can easily use those to bolster storage space if you need it in the future. So if you'd like to learn more about the DH2300 or one of UGreen's other products, you can of course check the links in the video description. It would also help support the channel as well. Furthermore, I've of course covered this in much more detail in a showcase, so of course you can check that video out, or there's an article as well which again is going to be linked in the video description. Thanks very much to UGreen for sponsoring the video, and also thanks to you for watching the ad. Let's get into the video. So yeah, I think this is a really good place to start. AMD's GPUs are getting more expensive. I won't spend too long on this because this is an article from just a couple of days ago, but I do think it helps set the scene. Long story short, we've been hearing for some time that AMD are going to increase the prices of its GPUs, and around 10% was what was touted previously. Now, however, it's stated that it's actually going to be $20 for the 8GB version and $40 for the 16GB cards. And AMD are certainly not the only ones to be doing this. We've also heard reports that Nvidia are no longer bundling RAM chips with its GPU chips, if that makes any sense. And of course, what has been happening historically with, for example, buying products from Nvidia. If you buy, if you set up an AIB, basically what happens is Nvidia sends you essentially a bundle, and then you would obviously want to assemble it. You create your own custom cooler, blah 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 blah, and then you can decide whether it's got RGB and all that pretty stuff. But ultimately speaking, Nvidia basically sends you the package, so you'd get, for example, GDDR7 memory, which hits the specifications that are required, and yeah, it makes things a lot easier. But now they are saying, well, you're on your own. And it's basically all, of course, to do with shortages, and it is affecting everyone. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, you can also see that the same report is indicating that that's phase 1. So phase 1 is, the early 2026 price increase that I just told you about. I'm just going to focus on the 16GB model for a moment, because I think most of you would be interested in that. That's $40. The good news, though, aren't you excited? You want some more good news? Of course you do. Well, there's a phase 2, so that's also going to be yet another price increase. So that's going to be $85. So basically, this is going to be affecting, well, essentially from now, potentially in January, and then there's going to be another phase. Now, in the translation, it does mention that there's no new products launched throughout 2027. However, I don't think that that's being accurately translated, because it is translation software. And WCCF Tech also thinks that it means there's no new products until 2027. And I think that makes a lot more sense, because what we know, of course, is that while AMD have been rumoured here or there to be releasing an RDNA 4 refresh, I just don't think it makes any sense. And what we can basically gather, given what we've seen from their desktop plans for CPUs, and also what the release timings have been for their GPUs, I think 2027 is a lot more likely for RDNA 5. I would love for it to be earlier. In fact, some of the earlier reports and rumours were that it would be next year, specifically in the second half, but I just don't see it at this point. So 2027 for RDNA 5 is becoming a lot more likely. What about RTX 50 Super, I hear you say? Well, there were reports previously, Uniqlo Hardware said that due to the crazy shortages, 3GB GDDR7, it's just not prevalent enough for consumer markets. Mega-sized GPU, and this now is on the 7th of November, so about a month ago, roughly speaking. They said it's not cancelled, just delayed. The launch is now the third quarter of 2026, but like he points out, that previously it was the first quarter. And honestly, guys, I really want to stress, this stuff is moving really fast. In fact, I don't think it's just like the rumour mill doing rumour mill things, because sometimes it can simply be that the rumour mill is just wrong. So, for example, you get told something and it's just made up, or it's not true, or it's old information, or what have you, or it's even a mistranslation, because again, if you're dealing with someone who speaks one language and you speak another language, and then you give it to someone else who also speaks another language, and it's not too difficult. Imagine, for example, you're speaking to someone who's Chinese, maybe you're even needing to use Google Translate, or they're using some type of translation software, then obviously it's sent to someone else who, let's hypothetically say they speak Swedish, and then you get it. It's just like, sometimes that can happen. However, in this particular case, I actually think it's simply because the shortages and everything is happening so damn fast. I mean, this is just one example of like an RKO out of nowhere. Micron have just killed Crucial. And, I mean, OC3D, I think they nailed it. Like, they just literally throw the customers under the bus. And this actually, like, I don't want to spend too long going into this. I mean, you can read the statement yourself if you want to. I don't want to subject you to it. Personally, I'll just recommend you close your eyes for a few moments. But it's essentially them admitting that servers, for example, can get them more money. AI is going to get them more money, so they're basically just stopping the Crucial brand. Crucial, and they have been an amazing brand. Like I've bought, multiple of their things before. Ballistic Memory and so on. I think I had like Ballistic DDR3, and it was so rock solid. Like seriously, that thing would overclock so well. It was rock solid. The SSDs have been really good and so on. So this sucks. Now, this is not to say that suddenly they are not going to be available for anyone to purchase, technically speaking, because Micron, of course, are still going to be providing chips. So, for example, if they provide them to one of their partners, I'll just make an example of like Kingston or whatever, then obviously they can still use Micron NAND or DDR5 chips or whatever. The other thing is that, and someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong on this, but while GDDR7 is obviously a different technology to HBM, I believe some of the manufacturing processes are pretty much it's pretty much linked. So it's going to be interesting what goes on with GDDR7 supply, and that's to say nothing of the fact that GDDR7 is also being used for other things, like the 1590s, I believe, are quite popular right now for AI. So it's going to be super interesting to see how all of that takes shape. Regardless, so yeah, I'm hearing, to be honest with you, the RTX 50 Super is potentially dead. Unless something improves. So it really is a case of, again, the primary difference in specification between, you know, the vanilla 50 cards and the Super cards, as you all know, is those 3GB memory modules. Now, maybe the Super cards could come back in another form, i.e. with wider buses or something like that, so that could happen. That's not a rumour, I want to stress. I'm just spitballing. They might be able to change it. However, even then, I'm not super certain about this. It's going to be really interesting what they decide to do. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen. I think at best we're going to see RTX 60. Now the question is RTX 60 going to be delayed? I don't think so. I already mentioned to you guys that I was hearing it was going to be like early 2027 that that Nvidia are going to be releasing this, and I think unless something crazy happens, Nvidia are going to release RTX 60 roughly in the same time frame that they're expecting. With that said, it will of course depend somewhat on capacity, and there is actually some good news. Intel, at the moment, their manufacturing is doing quite well. There's actually a report at the moment that allegedly Apple are looking at Intel for manufacturing of certain components in the future. Now, we'll have to wait and see on that, how that shapes up. But yeah, I personally think RTX 60 is a lot more likely at this point, and hopefully supply at that point of memory is going to be a lot better. Obviously, at this point, the market is trying to race to keep up, so it's going to be really interesting how the next next couple of months actually. I guess what I'm trying to tell you guys is I reckon over the next couple of months we're going to have a much better understanding. I think a lot of these rumors are going to be a lot more solid, and of course that's to say nothing of the consoles. Now, obviously, let's talk about the PS5 just for a moment. If you look at the PS5. The pricing, hasn't gone up right now, and it's probable that Sony, at least in the short term, are somewhat isolated against this, because they basically have long-term contracts for their memory, so they can lock in those prices, so that's good, because, we don't want the consoles to become more expensive. Gaming already is expensive enough. The problem is if it continues over long periods of time. Now, obviously, the PS5 does use GDDR6 memory, so there is some good news there. Or is it? Because, again, AMD are being charged more cash. Now, there are ways, of course, that they could perhaps reduce the bill of materials cost on the PlayStation 5 in the future, so it's going to be really interesting. But the big question is, of course, what happens with the PS6? I don't think at the moment there's a chance that the PlayStation 6 is going to be delayed, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with those specifications. I'm really hoping, though, that things do improve. So yeah, at this point, the prices for graphics cards aren't super crazy. There was actually a report, I think it's on WCCF Tech here, I can't actually find it. Where are you? I saw one earlier. Yeah, GPU deals aren't over yet. So, for example, you can still get some nice deals on the 9070 class cards. So, obviously, that's probably going to change. So, we'll just have to wait and see. With that said, guys, take care of yourselves. Have an amazing day. Bye for now.